As a fan of the Pokemon franchise since Generation 4, I've had plenty of thoughts and ideas for potential things I want to see in future Pokemon games. While nothing more than fun imagination at the time, some of these thoughts did end up having some meaning, a bit of premonition of things and gameplay mechanics that will be seen in actual future games. And in order to celebrate the first video of 2026 and the Pokemon franchise's 30th anniversary, I thought I could go over some of these accidental prophecies and see just how many of them I actually got correct. Which, depending on your interpretation, okay, it's not going to be a whole lot of them. I am Jason from the Inferno Co, and here are some of the wild Pokemon predictions I accidentally got right. Sorta. We first start with Sword and Shield, and a big one. Dexit. Of course, I had no idea how big of an issue this would be, or how much it would be the progenitor for modern discourse amongst the online Pokemon community to this day. But leading up to Let's Go's release, I thought this would be the perfect time to cut back on the National Dex, which has been a decision I noticed Game Freak already making on their own with their sudden exclusion of one during the Gen 7 games. Yeah, go back and look, there is no National Dex in those games. That kind of baffled me too at the time. You need to understand, at this point in history, we had reached over 800 Pokemon and it was getting even more difficult to maintain them all with each passing generation, accounting for all the different moves and abilities made over the 20 years, and the possible compatibility issues with moving on to a new console added an extra layer of complexity. While lacking any proof, I made an offhanded comment to Ian once long ago that this would be a good time for them to put a temporary pause on the National Dex or transferability until Game Freak would be able to sort everything out and focus on the, at the time, new and upcoming Generation 8, to which they would be somewhat eventually successful. I personally didn't mind not being able to use older Pokemon at first, so long as Pokemon Bank was still functional, and we would eventually be able to transfer them up to the Switch, as I prefer to start each new game with a whole new team, and give each new cast of Pokemon a chance to shine and tell their story. Though even as someone who was fine with the National Dex cut, I think Game Freak could have communicated their idea a lot better, and just be honest with their intentions, without accidentally giving a false sense of hope to upset members of the community, or try to quell the flames by giving what may have been a hastily and poorly worded response. But if I see anyone going into the comments and still complaining about the National Dex cut, I will enter your home tonight and eat your cookies. What? While the National Dex controversy may have permanently ruined online discourse and set our entire species back a couple generations, one great new feature from Sword and Shield I absolutely admire has to be the wild area. The idea of a massive spanning location full of wild Pokemon living free and in nature, where you can explore for days on end, was a concept I'm glad to have played in, and sees potential return in new games with different iterations and systems. Now this would be such a great idea that when word arrived of my childhood gateway games, Diamond and Pearl being remade, I wondered how they would introduce a wild area into a game that never had one, or the real estate to develop a new one. But this is Japan, and if you don't have the space to build horizontally, you gotta develop vertically. And so my thought was that the Sinnoh Underground would be revamped and reworked into a massive connected wild area. An entire hidden world beneath Sinnoh, full of high-leveled rare Pokemon to find and items for the player to uncover, taking the best parts of Diamond Pearl and Sword and Shield. Of course, I would be mostly incorrect. As the final release for Brilliant Shine, we would see that the Sinnoh Underground would now be full of many small habitats, now home to Pokemon not normally found in Sinnoh, with the connected hollow mine shafts just like in the original Sinnoh games. Although the base building mechanic was largely gutted and replaced with statue building that would affect the wild spawns in the nearby habitats, so the Grand Underground was not nearly as grand as I had hoped. I should not be ad-libbing, I'm bad at this. Do not go off script! A little disappointing my wild underground concept wasn't fulfilled, but it wasn't the only idea I had for a Sinnoh revamp. Like previous remakes we've seen in this franchise, I assumed Brilliant Shine would be based on the gameplay found on Sword and Shield, seeing as remake games are typically based on foundations from the previous generation debut games that came right before them. like how Fire Red Leaf Green were based on Ruby Sapphire, Heart Gold Soul Silver were based on Diamond Pearl, Auras on XY, yeah, just that idea. With this in mind, I thought Brilliant Shine would also try to work in Dynamax into its story, and assumed that Dialga and Palkia would receive new Dynamax forms I called Titanmax forms. Which I justified with the stupidest reason ever. It's because Dynamax can be shortened to D-Max, Gigantamax can be shortened to G-Max, so obviously the step above that would have to rhyme and follow the rules, so Titanmax would be shortened to T-Max. Yeah, no wonder why this one didn't happen. Of course I would be incorrect, as Brilliant Shine would not include any gimmicks or anything introduced after the original Diamond Pearl. Instead, it would take the next game, Legends Arceus, for us to receive brand new origin forms for the Space-Time duo. So even though I was wrong about which games would have new forms for Dialga and Palkia, and what they would use to unlock these new forms, and pretty much everything I could have possibly guessed about new forms, it did, in a roundabout and incorrect way, predict new forms for them. But speaking of Legends Arceus, I do have one thing that also came true in what might be my current favorite Pokemon game of all time. For you see, the three Nintendo franchises that make up my personal Nintendo Trinity are Pokemon, Fire Emblem, and Xenoblade. And a fun mechanic from the Xenoblade series that I wanted Pokemon to adopt were the Unique Monsters, which are a series of optional bosses scattered throughout the Xenoblade games that are stronger than the typical enemy/monster encounters found in the area, with a special boss theme and cool item drops. That was an idea I wanted in Pokemon. Every route would have a select few special wild Pokemon that were stronger than the others found on the route, but came with special rewards for either defeating them or even try catching them for the brave and daring trainers. And would you look at that? Arceus himself answered my prayers, and just so happened to bring us the alpha Pokemon that fit that very description. He did make my wish come true, which you could also achieve by liking this video and subscribing. And by the looks of it, it even seems like Game Freak wants to continue this feature, as they even brought it back for Legends EA. It's kinda odd how alpha Pokemon didn't spawn in Scarlet Violet, but they did get a commemorative ribbon and a title, so it looks like alphas will only show up in Legends games for the foreseeable future. Hey, now that I mentioned Scarlet Violet, let's go over to the fringe predictions I've made for. On a random day out of the blue, I suddenly wanted to have just one more run in Pokemon Sword, and have another journey through Galar and catch some of the missing Pokemon I wanted from my living dex. This time, I wanted to come up with a brand new OC to play as and center a team theme around. Seeing as Gigantamax Orbeetle existed and wasn't being used by a significant main character, I decided to make a bug-themed trainer who would use G-Max Orbeetle as their ace. And the name I decided for this trainer was Scarlet, referencing the color of Orbeetle and ladybugs, and I thought Scarlet was just a nice name. So imagine the look on my face when the next games revealed for Generation 9 would be Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Well, never mind. Suddenly, I didn't want the Nintendo Ninjas potentially taking another idea from my imagination, and that actually kind of ended my desire to replay Sword. This wasn't even a legitimate prediction, just a weird, happy coinkydink. But a successful accidental prediction I made was that Scarlet Violet would not have a set gym leader order that made the player face the gyms in a preordained order and allowed you to collect the gym badges in whichever sequence you desired. I found this out when I realized I beat Brassius before Katie and wondered, that's weird, why the heck are her levels so lower than— oh, I'm an idiot, that's why. A lot like in Breath of the Wild, I got distracted by all the everything and ended up going to Artisan before Cortando. They even announced that you could do the gyms in whatever order you want, but I completely forgot it and rediscovered it for myself, so yes, I am a moron, but sometimes a correct one. Maybe if the map weren't so big and empty, I'd actually go onto the correct intended path and not accidentally skip a gym. Which I'm allowed to say this because I actually like these games, even if they needed another year in the oven. Should this video get out in time, it would be released right before Pokemon's 30th anniversary. I can go more in depth about the latest game released so far, Legend ZA, before they potentially make their next major announcement. I had two predictions that loosely foretold this game. The first one was that I imagined the idea of a Pokemon game taking place in one massive city. This was an idea I had long ago when watching The Legend of Korra for the first time, and seeing Republic City in all its shining grandeur made me think of an entire Pokemon game taking place inside a massive city-sized region. That could have been an interesting twist to the Pokemon formula. Instead of traveling to different cities and towns, you would travel to different districts to challenge the gyms. And instead of traveling on routes, you would go through massive parks to get to the other districts. More than a decade later, we would see that concept explored in Legend ZA, as the game took place in Lumiose City going through urban redevelopment after the Geosenge incident. This would be a bit smaller than what I imagined, each of the Lumiose districts being roughly the size of the districts I imagined in my own city concept, so my city game idea will be close to the size of 3 Lumiose cities to account for 8 gyms, the Pokemon League, other miscellaneous areas, and the paths in between them all. The second prediction I made that loosely ties back to ZA was that of a Legends game taking place in the future, a concept you can see in this video where Ian and I pitched our idea for a Legends game set in Johto. He wanted a Legends game set in Johto's past, roughly in the same era as Legends Arceus, but I imagined a Legends game set in Johto's far future in the middle of a climate crisis. And just as the announcement for Legends ZA threw everyone out of the loop by bypassing all of our predictions for a Legends Johto game or a Black White remake, once we got our hands on the game, we would see that indeed, I was correct, and we would get a Legends game set in the future. A whole 5 years after X and Y instead of my theorized millennium, so I was off by almost a millennium. You know the difference between $1 million and $1 billion is about $1 billion. Can't win them all, or just about anything when it comes to these predictions I've made. At this point, you may have seen an obvious pattern here that the majority of my predictions were way off. And even the few that were sort of correct, I used the wrong formula each time and only accidentally got the right-ish looking answer. So should any of these predictions be taken seriously? Oh, absolutely heck not, and that's coming from the guy making this video. So, where does that leave us for future predictions? I surprisingly don't have that many, and the rare few that I wrote down, I kinda wanna rework into future video ideas. So instead, I'll go over the one prediction that I'm almost certain won't happen. Something I actually really appreciate about the Legends games is how they aren't completely easy to cheat your way through victory. Most Pokemon games can eventually be won by mindlessly mashing A and over-leveling your way to success, but in the 2 Legends games we've had so far, even a fully trained level 100 team can still struggle against a few of the game's threats and require some amount of thought to win. While Legends Arceus focused more on catching Pokemon and exploration, Legends ZA focused more on battling. So what if we had a future Legends game that combined these 2 aspects together in order to create the most difficult game of all time? All set in a new region based on Australia, because a joke that I often make with my friends is that Australia is Earth's post-game area. Everything there wants you dead there. Plants, the animals, the Australia, everything. I'd like this hypothetical Australia region to be one massive and dangerous continuous wild area that has some of the most aggressive wild Pokemon and battle-happy trainers that the series has ever seen. And to make things even more difficult, this game idea would also include a regional dex that is entirely full of brand new regional variants and cross-generation evolutions. Imagine here for a second seeing close to 200 familiar Pokemon with whole new looks, types, living in different habitats, with different stat spreads taking on new roles in team composition, so everyone essentially has to start fresh and can no longer rely on older knowledge about these Pokemon, making them feel even more dangerous and threatening. By far, this is the most fringe idea that I've had and will probably never come true. But imagine if it did. Those were all of the loose predictions I made for the past couple generations. So tell me what you thought of them in the comments. Did I fulfill any prophecies in your eyes, or are these just happy accidents? Yeah, these were astoundingly accidents, don't lie to me. Share some of your crackpot predictions and let's see if anything actually comes true in the future or not. Yeah, let's check back this video in 10 years and see how well it ages. But while we wait for what's probably a Gen 10 announcement, here are some other Pokemon related videos I made that you can enjoy in the meantime. And with that, have a good 2026 and a good rest of your day.